You're listening to Ghost Towns of Freeborn County, and I'm your host, Gary Schindler. I'm a local historian and also a board member for the Freeborn County Historical Museum and Village. And we're going to spend some time together over 6 episodes to explore the ghost towns of Freeborn County. This is a 6-part podcast, and the first episode is going to focus on a snapshot of the ghost towns that may be profiled later on in the series. Our second episode is about the abundance of Freeborn County. We're a county in south central Minnesota, but there are some unique aspects to this county that did help it prosper in the late 18 and early 1900s. Our third episode will be a fun one. It'll be about the fight or race to establish the county seat. This is a tale of questionable ballots and of an alleged horse race that was used to select the city that ultimately became the county seat for Freeborn County. Our fourth episode focuses on the faith community within the ghost towns of Freeborn County. There are a number of congregations established in the late 1800s, usually starting out in people's homes, but we're going to profile some of the ghost towns and some of the faith communities that were established in those communities. One community, for example, had a population of 450 people, but 8 different church congregations that existed at that time. Our fifth episode will actually showcase some select ghost towns. We'll look at who settled those communities, what made up the community as far as businesses and different structures that were built within that community. And a lot of times, again, if something closed or if a town shut down, buildings were literally moved to another location that became a permanent community within Freeborn County. And our final episode, episode 6, is just going to be a collection of some unusual tales, some of them tragic, about some of the residents of Freeborn County and the early settlement of this county in south central Minnesota. But to give us some context, I first want to look at what was happening politically in this area of the Minnesota Territory. I would say a trigger event was in 1848 when Wisconsin achieved its statehood with its current borders. That happened in May 29th of 1848. And as a result, the land that we would consider the state of Minnesota was really unattached. It was not really a territory, and there was a need for some immediate political action. So on August 26th of that year, there was the Stillwater Convention, which organized the territory of Minnesota. Again, that's 1848. Then Congress approved the territory in March of 1849. And I would consider that Minnesota as a territory was on a fast track as far as being settled and then having the requisite population size to then go to the Congress to be established as a state. And that happened 9 years later on May 11th of 1858. The settlement of Freeborn County, again, the territory is established in 1849. The first settlement in Freeborn County is in 1853. Just to give you some context again concerning Freeborn County, we're looking at a south central Minnesota county made up of 720 square miles or 450,000 acres. Water is a critical resource for these communities to transport goods, a source of water power, source of drinking water, and in Freeborn County, counted in that day in the 1850s, had 30 lakes, 8 prominent streams or rivers, including the Shell Rock River, Goose Creek, and State Line Creek. It was noted in the history of Freeborn County that the fall was not that great of these streams, but there was enough of a fall or a current within the creek or river to use for water power. I think it's also important to note that there is a sequence of activities that happen when it comes to settlement. So for many of the ghost towns, and I'll give you a few, the first event that occurred was the settlement. People came in via prairie schooner or a coach. Some walked, literally as a gentleman that walked from Dubuque, Iowa, to settle and claim land in Freeborn County. But there's a sequence of things that happen. Newry, for example, which is in the northeastern corner of Freeborn County, was settled in 1854, but the community of Newry was not organized until 1858, so 4 years later. Nunda is another ghost town in Freeborn County, and that was settled in 1856, but not organized until 1858. The same would be true of St. Nicholas, really the first village in Freeborn County that was settled, again, 1853, 1854, but the village of St. Nicholas was not established until 1856. And there is a pecking order or a sequence that these settlements might go through. First of all, you'll have settlement of the real estate. Then that gathering of people may become a station, might evolve into a village, and that village, for example, might potentially become an established city that exists today. For example, Glenville, again in southern central Freeborn County, was settled in 1853 and organized as a village in 1857. Its initial name was called Shell Rock because it was on the Shell Rock River, and eventually became the community of Glenville. So that gives you a sense of how the settlement of Freeborn County occurred and eventually becoming statehood in the year that I designated previously. That was 1858. Now what I'd like to do for the balance of this first podcast is to give you a brief profile of these communities that no longer exist in Freeborn County. These aren't in alphabetical order. These aren't based on the year of settlement. They're simply a random snapshot of some of the ghost towns of Freeborn County. The first one is Dorwart, Dorwart. This is about a mile south of Clark's Grove, which I would consider Clark's Grove sort of central Freeborn County, north of Albert Lee. Actually, this community was established in 1900 as a potential depot site for what was the Burlington-Cedar Rapids Northern Railroad, but they were purchased by the Chicago Rock Island Pacific Railroad in 1902, so 2 years later, and then there was no need for Dorwart. There was actually the start of construction in Dorwart in anticipation of the train going through and this becoming a depot city, but with the purchase of the railroad by Chicago Rock Island Pacific Railroad in 1902, there was no plans. They were abandoned to have a depot there. And so now what was Dorwart is now the Clark's Grove Golf Course. Another ghost town in Freeborn County is Trenton. Trenton was originally located in the northwestern corner of Freeborn County. Trenton existed as a village from 1857 to 1900. There are literally no homes in Trenton. There was a post office and a general store, and people lived in those buildings. Those are the residents of Trenton. The post office closed in 1887, but there was a creamery there in Trenton, Freeborn County, and it was the focus of that village. The financing for that creamery was through a bank in New Richland, Well, that bank failed in 1900, and as a result, the creamery failed, and as a result of the creamery failing, Trenton no longer was a village anymore. So its life was from 1857 to 1900. Sigsbee, a cute name, I think, for a town that's in between Albert Lee and Oakland, if our friends know where Oakland is. Sigsbee, again, central, Freeborn County, slightly to the east. And Sigsbee existed as a village from 1893 to 1900, so seven years. And again, Sigsbee existed as two buildings, a store, a post office, with residents associated with those buildings. When the village declined or no longer existed, the post office was moved to Hayward in the 1940s, and then they also had a creamery, and that burned down in 1927. When it comes to the names of these villages, many are named after an individual, but some are named after historical figures. So we have a people settling Freeborn County that have an awareness and an appreciation of history, but also an appreciation too of towns from where they were from in either Norway or England. In the case of Sigsbee, Sigsbee was named after the commander of the Maine, and the Maine was blown up in Havana Harbor in 1898, and that event triggered the Spanish-American War. The headlines were "Remember the Maine," and the U.S. went to war with Spain, and again essentially captured Cuba and Puerto Rico and the islands off of the coast of Florida. But Sigsbee was named after the commander of the Maine. We have Fairchild. Again, Fairchild is east of Albert Lee, a small village from 1857 to 1860, so 3 years of existence for Fairchild. It was established by its founders as, again, speculation that a railroad was coming through the area. And when the railroad didn't come, Sigsbee disappeared. Now, Sigsbee did consist of a sawmill, a general store, post office, a blacksmith shop. There were 4 homes. Fairchild was located south of Rice Lake for the folks that have some familiarity with Freeborn County. But again, the failure of the railroad to come through was the demise of Fairchild. We have Notvold. Notvold had a life of about 22 years. Notvold is directly south of Albert Lee, between Twin Lakes and Gordonsville. Notvold consisted of a town hall, a creamery that closed in 1914, and a general store that closed in 1918, and it was named after a state senator by the last name of Notvold. We have another village of Clover. Clover is between Conger and Twin Lakes, and the focal point of Clover was its creamery. That creamery closed in 1915 and was converted into a machine shop, and that machine shop was destroyed by heavy winds in 1962. In addition, in Clover, there was a general store with a post office, and Clover was around from 1890 to 1915. As you can see in these snapshots, the creamery is essential. A lot of dairy cattle being raised in Freeborn County, a high demand in the country for milk, butter, eggs, etc. And Freeborn County was definitely a provider of that produce shipped through mainly to Minneapolis and Chicago. But the creamery was key. If you wanted your ghost town, or if you wanted your town or your village to survive, it was critical to have some economic base. So again, a creamery, might be your answer. Having a mill if you have water power nearby. If you could become the county seat, that was key to survival and prosperity. So we had 6 communities vying for the county seat in Freeborn County because the people knew that that would be key to establishing a community. Let's move on. We have another village way in the southeast corner of Freeborn County on the Iowa border, actually spilled over into Iowa, and that was Deer Creek. Now, this case, deer is not the 4-legged animal you might think of. Deer is Danish for wild. So really, Deer Creek was Wild Creek, and it consisted of 2 churches, a general store, which was actually in Iowa, post office, creamery that burned down in 1908, a harness shop, blacksmith shop, and a shoe repair shop. So a fairly diverse economy in Deer Creek. The people that came to Deer Creek arrived via prairie schooner. And a prairie schooner, another word for that, is a covered wagon. For many residents, by the way, as our settlers came into Freeborn County, they didn't immediately have a home to move into. So many lived in their prairie schooner for a period of time until a shack or a shanty could be built. In some cases, as winter approached and the timing of an individual's arrival, they might just dig a hole and put some timbers over the top and live in that hole through the winter until they had time to build a dwelling. Living in a hole in the ground was even common among our early colonists on the East Coast. Another ghost town, just returning to our profile, is Moscow. Again, here's a connection to history and these residents that were well aware of its history. Moscow was named by a resident based on their recollection of the fires that occurred in Moscow, Russia, after Napoleon attacked the city in 1812. The memory of that event was triggered by a fire within a stand of oak trees near the new village of Moscow. There were 5 church congregations in Moscow in a community of 650 people. Moscow considered of a flour mill, post office, a general store. Again, when that closed, that general store was moved to Hayward. There was a sawmill, and when that closed, that was moved to Waseca in 1866. There was a hotel, creamery, a school, and a sorghum syrup mill in Moscow. Again, fairly diverse economy, population of about 650 people, including, again, its rural residents. But Moscow was not an established city in Freeborn County, one of our ghost towns. Armstrong is between here and Alden, kind of south of I-90. And based upon its size, Armstrong was considered a station and not a village or a city. There was a railroad that did go nearby, but it did not facilitate the prospering of Armstrong, Freeborn County. It was named after Thomas Armstrong, again a prominent politician in Minnesota. He served between 1864 and 1898. He served as state representatives, Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives. He also served as lieutenant governor, and he was also a state senator. So Armstrong had its name from Thomas Armstrong. Another ghost town in Freeborn County is Sumner, and Sumner is west of Oakland, northeast of Hayward, and Sumner was established as a village 1857 to 1876, and that was actually a stagecoach stop between Austin and Albert Lee. Sumner consisted of a school, a church, some residents, post office, and as Sumner was declining, buildings were relocated, and eventually all of Sumner became farm fields. We have Bancroft, one of the cities that was in competition to become the county seat. And Bancroft, Freeborn County, is where the current location of the Good Samaritan home is in Albert Lea. So we have Bancroft. Many settlers from Bancroft came from Wisconsin and came here via ox cart versus the prairie schooner. Again, important to note, too, that Freeborn County was settled by folks from Wisconsin, Iowa, cities on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, New York, along with, again, folks from Norway, Denmark, Germany, England, Wales, just to name a few. Bancroft, a little bit of a claim to fame for Bancroft was that the editor of the Bancroft Press was a David Blakely, who later became the editor of the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Now, when Bancroft lost the election in 1850 to be the county seat, many of the buildings were moved to the village of Itasca, which we'll profile in a later episode, or to the city of Austin. Many of the lots were sold to the county then to establish a county poor farm. And again, that gives you a sense of some of the institutional dynamics within cities and counties, is that if you could not pay off your debts, you might be relocated to a poor farm where you'd have to essentially provide some labor to support yourself and at least have some lodging and a meal or two. The village of Bancroft consisted of a sawmill, a post office, a town hall, a creamery, a saloon, and a general store. It was named after George Bancroft, who was Secretary of the Navy for the United States and the founder of the Annapolis Naval Academy and an ambassador to England. So again, we have folks that are aware of prominent folks within our country and the events of history. So Bancroft, again named after George Bancroft, a prominent national figure at the time. We have Bath. Bath is in north-central Freeborn County, near the northern border of Freeborn County. Its early residents were from Denmark principally, but also from Norway, Wales, England, Germany, and Ireland, to kind of give you a sense of the diversity of countries that people represented that settled in Bath. One of the prominent structures in Bath was the St. Aidan's Catholic Church, and that was eventually moved after the village declined in 1955 to Ellendale, which again is not in Freeborn County, but in Ellendale, now the St. Aidan's Catholic Church was incorporated by Steve's Meats. So the church was downtown Ellendale, and Steve's Meats purchased part of that for principally storage. In 1880, continuing with the profile of Bath, the population in 1880 was 950 people. And the Minnesota Historical Society notes that Bath was the longest established ghost town in Freeborn County, being settled from 1857 till 1963. But eventually it did demise. I've been to Bath, and there are remnants of Bath there, a barn, a home that has been received multiple remodelings, but there are remnants of a home from the late 1800s in Bath. But the prominent artifact in Bath is the Catholic cemetery, St. Aidan's Cemetery, and I'll profile that when we talk about the churches of Freeborn County. St. Nicholas, another community vying to be the county seat for Freeborn County, and a lot of political dynamics associated with St. Nicholas. We'll get into that when we listen, or when we do the podcast for the race and fight for the county seat in Freeborn County. St. Nicholas, their claim to fame, they're right along the Albert Lee Lake on South Shore Drive. They were the first community, the first blacksmith shop, the first post office, first hotel, and the first general store in Freeborn County. St. Nicholas did have a short life. It was settled and established as a village in 1855 and existed till 1862. Again, it was a candidate for the county seat in an election of 1857, but when it lost that race, the village leaders essentially moved most of the buildings to Alexandria, which was, again, an emerging community. Again, you have to remember that the folks here that settled Minnesota Territory, settled Freeborn County, are looking for opportunities. Much of it is farming, but they're looking for opportunities. And when the opportunity fails, for example, with St. Nicholas losing that county seat race, then the folks look for another opportunity in some other location. That might be another state, like the Dakota Territory or Kansas. In this case, it was Alexandria. An interesting note, this will be one of my tales in episode 6, but as the village was failing in 1862, scavengers found equipment in the remains of St. Nicholas to counterfeit 50-cent pieces. Very intriguing, and I'll share more with that in a later episode. A few more villages to profile in this first episode of our podcast, The Ghost Towns of Freeborn County, is Newry, again in the northeastern corner of Freeborn County. Newry was known for its dark loam soil, fertile soil, 3 feet deep of dark loam. The early settlers of Newry were Irish, Norwegian, and German. The population of Newry in 1880 reached 737 people. So we have a fairly large community in Newry. Newry consisted of a post office, a school, creamery, general store, St. Mary's Catholic Church, and the Red Oak Norsk Lutheran Church. And we'll talk about the Dansk Norsk Lutheran Church in our church episode. There was actually a Dansk Norsk Synod of the Lutheran Church. Again, Dansk Norsk is a blending of Danish and Norwegian language. And so more on that later. Lerdahl, again, to give you a sense of where Lerdahl is, it's near the Walmart, north of the Walmart in Albert Lee. And Lerdahl is one of our ghost towns. The creamery, again, was the center of activity in Lerdahl, and they had a national reputation for what was called navy butter. Another name for that we're more familiar with is sweet cream butter, and most of the butter out of Lerdahl from that creamery, which still stands today, was sold in New York. The town also had a harness shop, a shoe shop, a blacksmith shop, a post office, a general store, and a town hall. And that community was served by a network of Norwegian Lutheran churches. Again, more on that in the church episode of this podcast series. But the Norwegian Lutherans in Freeborn County were very strategic, and they literally built a network or established a network of Norwegian Lutheran churches. We had north, south, east, west, and central Freeborn Lutheran churches established principally between 1857 and 1865. More on that later. And finally, we have the village of Itasca, right on the outskirts of Albert Lee. It's the location now of a rock garden, which is being organized by the Freeborn County Historical Museum and the Three Oaks Winery. It was a contender for the county seat in another election to establish the county seat. This was in 1860, the same year that Abraham Lincoln was elected, and it lost that race to Albert Lee 480 votes to 290 votes, but there was many concerns about ballots and ineligible voters voting, which is kind of smacks of our current events today. There was a pioneer trail that ran from the village of Itasca to Mankato, Minnesota, and the village consisted of a hotel, a general store, a shoe shop, a photo shop, a dentist office, a shoemaker's shop, a blacksmith shop. There was a newspaper, the Freeborn Spring Herald, a post office, and 15 homes. So again, maybe a village on the way up, but in losing that county seat race, it failed to prosper and essentially has been incorporated into the city of Albert Lea. So my friends, that's our first episode of the Ghost Towns of Freeborn County. Our next episode, we'll take a look at the abundance of Freeborn County. I want to thank you for listening. Tell your friends about this podcast series. I think you'll find it entertaining, enlightening, and very informative. And I'm your host, Gary Schindler, with the Freeborn County Historical Museum.
This collaboration is made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund through the vote of Minnesotans on November 4th, 2008, administered by the Minnesota Historical Society.